and I'm honored to be here to stand as her daughter, sister, friend at the unveiling of the Maya Forever stamp. No doubt about it.
We've lost power in the building.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Power was gone. Lights are on here, though, as we welcome you into Hour 3 of America's Forum with Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth, Oprah Winfrey at the Warner Theater in Washington, D.C., honoring Maya Angelou with the Postal Service stamp forever, she said, honoring the late poet.
Yeah, though, as we just saw, the theater suffered from a power loss, but it didn't stop there. It seemed to go on forever. D.C. saw power outages across the city and what is being attributed to an explosion at a power plant in Maryland. The White House, Capitol, and State Department all went dark.
Let's talk more about this story. In our studio on the anchor desk, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, and from Newsmax Washington, it's our good friend, Republican strategist Ford O'Connell. So, Ford, first to you, where were you when the lights went out? Did you go through that blackout?
No, I did not. I'm lucky. I'm on the GW hospital power grid, so it's going to take entire Washington to be knocked out for me to lose power. But I think it's pretty scary when something like this is able to knock out the White House and the State Department. It really should send a message to Americans that we're vulnerable.
Doctor, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I do agree with it. And even though the official explanation is that this was a mechanical failure, the small explosion, I'm not sure I trust that. The electric power industry has a long history of concealing actual attacks on our electric grid. Back in 2013, there was an attack, a professional attack, according to the U.S. Navy SEALs and the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the transformer substation outside San Jose, California. It looked like a team of 6, professional operation, but it took 9 months before this was disclosed. The electric power industry was initially dismissing it as an act of vandalism. And later it took an investigation by the U.S. FERC and the U.S. Navy SEALs to say, no, this looked like a professional terrorist attack on that transformer substation. So they're always forthcoming with what happened. This probably was a mechanical accident, but our society is extremely vulnerable. That same organization, the U.S. FERC, put out a study that concluded that if just 9 key transformer substations were attacked in this country, it could put the whole nation into a blackout lasting 18 months.
Well, Dr. Pry, that leads me to an interesting question. Former Clinton Energy Secretary Bill Richardson has been screaming for years that our power grids are outdated and vulnerable. Why have the Obama and Bush administrations done nothing about this? Because given the rise of hacking and cyber terrorists, this is a pretty scary situation and could do far more damage than a nuclear bomb.
Yes, we're also concerned about an attack from a nuclear bomb. North Korea and Iran have both practiced nuclear EMP attacks off of ships and using satellites. In 2013, there was a satellite flown over the United States, as a matter of fact, coincident with our nuclear crisis with North Korea. And it looked like North Korea was practicing an EMP attack in the middle of that. It's not been for lack of trying in Washington. But on a bipartisan basis, there have been attempts to pass bills. The Democrats introduced a bill called the GRID Act. Right now, there's a bill sitting in the Congress called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, which is the intent of which is to try to protect our electric grid against the worst case threat, which is an electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear weapon or the sun. If you're protected against that, you'll be protected against lesser threats too, like physical sabotage and cyber attacks and the like. But Washington is so broken. You know, we've been trying for 8 years and, haven't been able to get either of those bills passed. So in frustration, people like me, our organization, which is a congressional advisory board, we've been going to the states. And I'm in Florida now. We're being interviewed in Florida, but I'm here because there's going to be a closed hearing on Monday in front of the Florida State Legislature to talk about protecting the Florida grid. And we've made more progress at the level of the states than we have in Washington in all these years. The states of Maine and Virginia and Arizona have already, all of them have passed bills to protect their people from the event of a protracted blackout.
Just got to ask you the politics of it in Washington. 30 seconds. Are leading utilities opposed to any type of EMP safeguards? Are they slowing this down right now?
They are. Its name is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. In fact, the Edison Electric Institute just put out a very dubious propaganda sheet that's full of misinformation about why we don't need to protect the grid, or that they're on top of it, trust them, they're going to protect the grid. Well, they've been given years to do it, and the grid isn't protected, as we could just see what happened in Washington. If Washington grid was protected, this wouldn't have happened.
Well, we hope we're going to be able to keep these lights on and come back with more as we talk about this possible threat here on America's Forum.
Begin stage one.
Back on America's Forum with Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth, we just saw scenes from the motion picture Live Free or Die Hard based on an attack on Washington, D.C.'s infrastructure. So yesterday, was that an example of art imitating life? Let's continue our conversation with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry about all our vulnerability with a blackout, and also our good friend Ford O'Connell checks in from Newsmax, Washington. The scenes we saw in that, we understand there's some dramatic license, but essentially, is what we saw on the silver screen what we might get in reality?
Oh yes, in fact it would probably be much worse than that if you were talking about a nuclear EMP attack or a cyber attack that shut down the grid for a protracted period of time. Those things, those kinds of common accidents with stoplights and the like would be the least of our concerns. The Congressional EMP Commission in which I served was concerned that 9 of 10 Americans could die of starvation, disease, and societal collapse if we were without electricity for just a year. It isn't just an inconvenience when you're talking about a protracted blackout. And this is a real world. It isn't just a theoretical threat. Just last week, almost the entire nation of Turkey was blacked out. And we don't know why. The Turks are still investigating that. There was only one province that wasn't affected by the blackout, and it was importing electricity from Iran. The year before that, back on June 9th of 2014, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula blacked out the entire nation of Yemen. So that's a country of 24 million people in 18 cities. It's the first time in history that a whole nation was blacked out by a terrorist attack. And across our border in 2013, just before Halloween on October 27th, the Knights Templars, they're a terrorist drug cartel, they blacked out nearly 500,000 people in Mexico, across our unprotected border in Mexico, so they could go into towns and villages and execute political leaders opposed to the drug trade. Now this is really happening in the real world. Oh, and I forgot to mention Pakistan. On the 25th of January of this year, 80% of the grid was blacked out by a terrorist attack in Pakistan, and they're a nuclear weapons state. Many of us are concerned.
Dr. Pry, let me bring it back to the states for a second. You were talking about Florida's power grid. Basically, the U.S. power grids work on what's known as an interdependent system, whereas one area loses power, it pulls from another. Is that really the best system to have? Because if one gets knocked out, you're going to be straining everyone else. Is there a better system that we should be using at the state level to ensure that we minimize damage should this occur?
Well, what we would recommend is there are known technologies that have been proven by 50 years in the Department of Defense that we use to protect Department of Defense and military systems, surge arresters, Faraday cages, blocking devices. It's proven technology, and it doesn't require you to rewire the grid. You know, you can go back and install on the most important elements of your grid, which is the extra high voltage transformers, for example, blocking devices and surge arresters, so that they would be protected from an EMP or from an overvoltage caused by a cyber attack. Similarly, you can put the SCADA systems into Faraday cages to protect them. If you wanted to be more ambitious, there are better ways of constructing the grid. The more you have microgrids and the smaller components it's broken into, the more secure it would be. Sort of like the way a ship is designed when you design it into various watertight compartments. You know, that way if one compartment leaks, the whole thing doesn't collapse. you're quite correct. The way we are set up now is that when you get one part of the grid failing, you can end up with cascading failures, such as happened in the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003 that was started by a falling tree branch. A falling tree branch ended up putting 50 million people into the dark because of cascading failures through the whole system.
And in the short time that we have remaining, what has been the biggest holdup in getting this thing resolved? Is it just money?
Oh no, it actually wouldn't cost that much to protect the grid. We estimate that it would have cost about $2 billion. That was the EMP Commission's estimate. We give that away to Pakistan in foreign aid every year. If we suspended foreign aid to Pakistan for 1 year and spent it on the American people, we could solve this problem. It's the politics, unfortunately. The politics of EMP in Washington, the opposition from the electric power lobby, basically, they don't want to do anything. And it's not just about EMP and cyber attacks. It took them 10 years after the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. They didn't really want to do anything about what they call vegetation management. It took them 10 years to come up with an improved vegetation management plan. They are the last. The electric power industry is like the last critical infrastructure that basically operates without any real government supervision and oversight.
Now, Doctor, up on the Hill, my old colleague Trent Franks is leading the charge. You talked about bipartisanship in the states. Is the Obama administration trying to get something done on the EMP threat? 10 seconds.
They have done some things. I would like to see him issue an executive order. He's always talking about putting out executive orders. Here's one area where he could put out an executive order, and the EMP Commission even wrote an executive order for President Bush.
There you have it. We'll take a look. Doctor, thank you. We're coming back.